Welcome to the Heat Treat Podcast, sponsored by Matza, Creo, and Super Systems.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new episode of the Heat Treat Podcast. Today's guest is someone who's truly reshaping the heat treat industry, not with fire, but with code. Sefi Grossman is a seasoned software engineer, entrepreneur, and the founder of Combustion OS, a platform designed specifically for heat treaters to run their operations smarter, more efficient, and fully digitized. After more than 2 decades developing software for companies of all sizes, Sefi saw a huge opportunity to bring innovation into one of the most complex industrial environments out there, and he's been very successful. Sefi, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Carlos. I appreciate it.
So let's start with your story. How did you go from general software development, focusing entirely on the heat treat industry, focusing on the entire industry, now to be very niche on the heat treat industry? What sparked that creation? What sparked the creation of the Combustion OS, your company?
Sure. Yeah. So the software that built on top of all our systems is called Alpha, and we've done this for multiple different industries, different companies that require automation. And a few years ago, I ran into an opportunity to do some automation for a heat treater here in Detroit area. And I just, something kind of sparked with me as we went through that process, and the software just kept expanding and kept going deeper. And I looked at just the opportunity, and I think the biggest thing for me was just how much is still being done on paper, and how many things are just completely neglected compared to other industries, and the ability for us to bring in new technologies, specifically now all the new AI capabilities, which is like the farthest apart you think of between, what you think of a heat treat operation and how you bring, something like artificial intelligence into. So as we kept going deeper into a certain project, I just saw the opportunity to say, hey, this is something that if we want to do it right, we have to go very deep and make it something that we can offer for other heat treaters as well, both commercial and captive.
Can you share which other industries did you serve in the past, and success stories, how they went from paper to digitization, and the opportunity that you're seeing on the heat treat commercial side of it?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, most of everybody's has some similarities. There's certain, whether you're doing production in a warehouse, we have other industries where we do service-based ERP, where you'd have teams that go out and do things in, again, every type of industry you can think of, financial, building, construction, pretty much everything. Heat treat was a little different than what we would typically get into when it came to our model. And a lot of it too is just the deeper integrations that are available to us, and even in older machines and equipment, things that you might not think could be automated, absolutely could be. And that's what kind of sparked it. The other industries, we found a lot of success in them, but there's also a lot of players in the game, and so there's a lot of integrations and shifting around. And that's where we were looking at heat treat specifically, because it's just such a wide open opportunity, because there's so many things that can be improved upon. And that's where we started really focusing on this area specifically, in order to not just create a very basic level of an ERP system, but to really go down deep and start replacing off-the-shelf software that didn't really talk to each other, and kind of create this one holistic system where we do everything from shipping, receiving, to process tracking, to even HR and billing functionality. So looking at that whole thing. And one interesting thing, we're typically either replacing something that already exists and does a good job, and I think for certain operations is good. But there's other ones that just don't have the level of depth that you'd want, and the opportunities, the synergies between different softwares that just don't exist unless you do it holistically. And we could obviously, kind of talk about that in more detail. But this is something that, again, it's very, very exciting. And every time something else comes up, it's just another opportunity to bring our technology and improve an existing process.
So while you were working on different industries, and then you you come up with heat treat, right? Commercial heat treaters. From your experience with working with different heat treaters, which were the biggest operational bottlenecks that you saw, and how the digital tools can help you automate and solve them, specific to heat treat industry?
Sure. So a lot of it, like I said in the beginning, is just the paperwork process, the information being moved around within the building. There's a lot of bottlenecks in different job roles where things are stacked and piled up in order to be able to be processed. And a significant amount of double entry, a lot of
Double
data
entry.
entry where things, a ton of double entry.
What do you mean it's a
Things have to
double
be
entry?
ran.
Paperwork double entry, or they were
Or
receiving like on paper, and then they were doing double entry in the system, things like that. That
correct.
is
Yeah,
what you meaning?
absolutely. Yeah. Double entry, you have, multiple systems you have to enter things in, or you might have a system that's been working pretty good. And this is very common. We'd either meet with a heat treater that has a system, but it doesn't talk to another system. So they'd have to put in,
Right.
order information from one to the other. The other side is they might, this is also common. Someone might have some kind of homegrown system that they built, 10, 15, 20 years ago on like Microsoft Access or something else. And although it might have served them at that time to a point, maybe it's 80%, 90% of what they need, that is very hard to maintain. And if you're doing that just as a single project, it will get old, and you're going to have capabilities you cannot access. So when we came into it, we wanted to be a technology provider, but also like your innovation team, because we're always looking for new ways and new technologies and bring them into this process. So the double entry was just the first part. How do we do things where we put it in once, and then it makes sure that it's available across not only one system but multiple systems through the entire workflow. From speccing and quoting a part to getting it loaded into the recipes of what's going to go into a furnace, all the way to receiving parts, processing them, barcoding them, everything across the board. You just do something one time, and then everything auto populates, and that was like just a kind of the first part, just to get everything connected. And there's tremendous amount of opportunity. And then on the flip side of that, removing the paper. I
Yeah.
always have a goal to remove paper almost completely, make everything digital. We do, a lot of barcode and labeling QR codes that we put on everything, from bins to how we do preventative maintenance tracking through identity badges. Like everything is a code that you can scan, and that essentially will bring up the right information at the right time digitally, whether it's on a tablet, a computer, a kiosk screen. So removing the paper was kind of significant too, because that not to get too far off on this, but it's maybe kind of into a little bit further in this conversation. When you have things on paper, or you're loading things in double entry into multiple systems, you're losing an opportunity that most heat treaters aren't going to even think about. They're just trying to get through their process and do it as efficiently as they can. But there is just mountains of data that we can use to not only optimize what they're currently doing, but give them insights and open up all these new AI technologies that you just can't do when something is written down on paper or is spread across these proprietary systems. So when you bring it all into one place, now you have this whole new opportunity, and that's what we're kind of bringing in now, is to start to create some of those, and on the AI side, but just having everything in one place is great. And then just in general too, obviously all the compliance, depending on your industry, whatever compliance that you have, whether it's automotive, aerospace, whatever. to be able to have it all in one place and to align with their existing compliance process, that makes the audits a breeze, because everything is already loaded. All your processes are already loaded. Matter of fact, the systems can automatically bring up a lot of that data. So that has been kind of like one of the pillars of how you design a system. And every client's custom to some degree. There's a unique process that they have, and so the big thing for us, and it's always been even before heat treat, the systems we developed are not a one size fits all. They're not designed to make you change your process in order to match how the software works, which a lot of clients do. It's really designed to wrap around your business, around your heat treat, the type of customers you have. That's been a big push for us, is that we wanted to build something that matched the process, almost to the point that the level of measurement of how successful we are is how little training their team needs in order to use it, because it's either super intuitive, or even the digital versions of what the paperwork used to look like is almost identical. Everything was intuitive. They understood it. We didn't have to go through extensive training programs. And that's always been, even before we got into heat treating, always been part of our alpha platform. What we were trying to accomplish is create building blocks that we meet halfway between something that is out of the box, which you get a lot of that already, all the security and the database connectivity stuff. But really, how do we build something where I can wrap it around how you do business, just do it better way of doing it?
I really like your approach regarding the company not being, to go and just meet what the software does, but the software actually, being flexible to what how company runs and the process. So you spoke about two things. I mean, I do believe that heat treaters, no matter how digitized they are, they have a very deep focus on quality, compliance, and traceability, which the industry actually demands for. If you do not have that, you're out of business. You're not in this business. But
Right.
very seldom actually automates, shipping, receiving. I don't know if we can go to payroll, account receivable, accounts payable. But how do you actually match those? And my question being, many heat treaters are still using clipboards, travelers, and spreadsheets. When you come with a solution like this, there should be a lot of, it's a big change, right? It's a big change for them, a big cultural change for them. But how do you help teams go from paper-based system to fully electronic on a control platform? Because each operation is unique. You won't find identical heat treater from the other. There's gonna be glitches, one more furnace, one little furnaces, maybe different protocols, different signals, different softwares. I mean, how do you implement those on every base, and how do you work with them? Because implementation is hard, especially when you're doing an ERP.
It is, but I think to answer that question, and how we found success, where I think a lot of others have run into roadblocks or completely failed, is the approach of what you're building on top of. So if you are starting with an out-of-the-box ERP, and maybe it is designed for service manufacturing, but it's not specific to heat treating, then you're going to run into, again, the one-size-fits-all situation. Yes. Where you can customize, but there's a ton of assumptions made, and you're running on software that's really, really good for other industries. But like you're saying right from the beginning, you were saying too, heat treat is very complex. It's very complex because you have every heat treater is different. Every furnace that they have, all the process types, the type of shop you are, whether you're doing continuous or batch, and then the type of work that you get. Are you doing a large volume? Are you doing very a lot of variability? Every process, every part is a little different. What happens if you have to rerun something? What does that do to the digital? So this I guess the secret sauce that where we found success was actually where we found our first failure. So we came into this and built it similar to what you'd expect a normal ERP system to have. And if you break down software like this, it's data and forms. Things that you fill out. There's lists, there's items, there's forms. And we developed a outside of your customized list of information, like your customers, your parts, so on and so forth. There's a deeper level, especially if you need to trace and track these details with a tremendous amount of permutations and specificity. We had a completely different approach that we tried after we failed to create a web form system that can collect all that data, that can set all the parameters for a part, that can collect all of the tracking information on every run that goes through a furnace. And we built a completely different data structure that allows us, instead of what you traditionally do as a developer, build your database. So if you imagine a database, right, it's like a spreadsheet of information, a bunch of spreadsheets all working together in the most basic form, a relational database. And if I were to collect every piece of data I need, like every zone, every temperature, if you're doing carbon, if you're doing the atmosphere, whatever it is, you would have to create a column for everything. And when you look at it, every time you want to change something, you have to go in and redesign that. And that's very difficult to do. And in most systems, they allow you to create more columns, but it is very unmanageable. And you end up making a lot of compromises. So we designed a completely new process, not to software, but into the ERP space, where you actually design the form that you have based on, let's say, a process. And then you can just create it like you would what you would expect to see on a clipboard. So if I were to expect to see it on a clipboard, whether I build it in Microsoft Word or Excel, all the things that I want to be able to fill out, or all these specs that I just set up for a particular part, we designed so you can looks just like that. And then the database stuff just comes and wraps around it on the back end. So you don't have to administer a database at all. So this allowed us to create infinite number of permutations, allow it to package all of the different document requirements, whether it's part specs, even lab data collections, all the lab tests, the hardness tests, microstructure tests, everything that you'd have, we can now create them as these forms that coincidentally look just like what they're using today, because we match the look and feel of their existing forms, but it's all data driven. And another benefit, a bonus, which we wanted to meet the standard and now go beyond the standard, because our goal is to create a whole new golden standard for how we track and to have traceability for all this data for years, store it for years and be able to pull it up. Is that every piece of data that we collect, whether it's hand typed by an operator, or now as we have more integrations and we have data automatically updating these forms, which we can talk about later, that allows us to create a history. So every little piece of information that gets entered in, even if you go back and make a change, everything is audited. You cannot delete anything out of the system. So we can have an entire form filled out. And again, imagine what you'd see on a clipboard, but now it's digital. But every little thing that was typed, I know who typed it, what time, what the values were. So it gives us just a tremendous amount of accountability. And it's also something that the teams that use it really appreciate, because it forces them to complete everything that's required. So a lot of times, and this is when I walked in the first time, I'm seeing all this paperwork and there's half the things are not filled out. It's impossible logistically to be able to sign off on everything, that everybody's doing everything 100% correctly. But the computer, it can, for sure. And you can create different levels of, accountability, where things can be able to be either forced or warned or send a notification. So a lot of workflow type elements that you would expect out of an ERP, but just the ability for us to create tremendous amount of detail. And then on the flip side, in order to do it right, we can't just be a software company. We have to really, really understand the industry we're working in, what all those headaches are, where the issues come in, and like sit there literally in the factory, in the warehouse, and talk to the people who are actually using or were using it. And that creates all the missing pieces, all the gaps, and that's a big piece for us, that we don't just work out of an office somewhere else. We're always on site, and we're getting feedback from, the C-suite, but we're also getting feedback from, the furnace operators or people who are doing racking. Like, what is the best, most efficient way to do this? And that I think has been a big part of our success, where you really, you can't do that with a generic software, no matter how powerful or how complex you can make it. You want to make this a little more tailored to the industry, and then more specifically to their particular operation. And so that all those pieces kind of came together. And going back to our first point, why heat treat? Why are we focusing now just on heat treat when we've had success in all those other industries? Is because, again, in order to do it right, you have to completely commit yourself to the space. And that has been because there's just so much tremendous opportunity in this niche. That is why we decided to do all of those things, because we felt that we can succeed where a lot of others struggle.
So I want to touch base on AI. This industry, we have a lot of data that we need to keep on the cloud, on the storage, because of traceability, compliance. And I'm a heat treater myself, and it's just amazed the amount of data that you storage just to comply, but nobody analyze. Nobody does it. You just keep it just to
Yep.
to comply with it, right? To be traceable. What's your approach on analyzing all of this data that is getting storage every minute, every day, that it just gets storage in there for compliance, just to cover that? But how are you addressing that? Is there any AI on there? Do you have ambition, something to analyze the data and help the heat treater perform better? Is this something you're pursuing?
Yes. Yeah. And I think it's important, before we dive into just talking about AI as a tool, there is a differentiation between, by having data available to us to be able to do analytical reporting, which isn't necessarily AI. It's just being able to create, data dashboards and some forecasting capabilities. But it's mostly algorithmic. Like, it is a calculation or formula that you can do, which, by the way, just if we had that, is already significantly better than just locking away your data. So step
Sure.
one, which we went through, is get it digitized, because it doesn't do anyone any good if it's sitting in a cabinet.
Again, I love that. Stage one, digitize it. No paper.
Digitize it, right? So
Right.
we always love the AI stuff, and that's we know we can get there, but we have to start at the ground level. And to start at the ground level, we can't also just jump into process and all the fun stuff, right? You have to do all the boring stuff. We have to track all the bins, the orders, the containers. Like, you have to do almost all of it, because you will never be able to connect the dots if you didn't understand, or at least have a hand in the entire process. I'll say that's like step one. Once that you have all the data and it's in a format that can be queried and used from a database, and then we can start running some way more detailed reporting, and start to look at trends, which, by the way, correlate to the compliance conversation, because now we can do a lot of KPIs, or key performance indicators, of whether or not whatever we decide we're looking at what success means to a heat treater, month to month, quarter to quarter, year to year. We can now take all of that data that was entered in one place, and then reuse it as a KPI of whether or not we're doing a good job, or maybe even analyzing things outside of the organization. So, for example, if you had to push your furnace with trays, and you're bringing those trays in, and you're cycling them, and they start breaking down, that is data that you'd never track. But because our system tracks everything, like every little thing that goes through the furnace, and what went through the furnace, without having to create an extra job for somebody to collect that data, because we had inherited it, part of step one. Now we can take that same data and create a lifetime or life cycle for a particular piece of equipment, like a tray, or a roller, or a burner, or anything that we have, and we'll go back and say, all right, who is the manufacturer? Where did this come from? Where's the issue? And now we can start to optimize. And that's just one tiny piece of, let's say, maintenance. But you could do this across the board. You could take a look at all your data and say, all right, when we're processing, depending on the type of operation you are, whether you are a 24/6 shop or not, depending on the type of work you do. But if there's certain dips in production, if we have longer gaps, if there's equipment failures, can we go back and analyze and say, well, what was different about that? What was the anomaly? Who was working? Who's working the equipment? And sometimes, this is where I'm getting into the AI to answer your question. Sometimes you don't know what you aren't looking for. Like, you don't know what is missing. Like, where's the oddity here, right? Like, you can make assumptions. So we assume it's a person or a device, but sometimes there's just some weird anomaly that happens. So in order to be able to detect that, that's where you bring AI in, because AI, in general, is the ability to take massive amounts of data and find patterns and things that you might not see, that make no sense to us as humans.
Humans.
Yeah, exactly. So where can it see? And it allows us to bring insights. And obviously we have to have an interface, and now we have way more. So AI has kind of exploded to, everybody uses this. I hope they use to some degree for their day-to-day lives, whether you're writing an email or anything else. But we do have all those systems available to us, so we can actually inquire on the data and say, what are the possible reasons why this event occurred? And now I have all the data we've collected and be able to create a hypothesis on where there might be a problem. Again, whether it's a quality problem, or a production efficiency problem, whatever it is. So that's just from just analyzing. That is where I think AI kind of comes in. Not your day-to-day reporting, but really allows you to do a deep analysis on things that you might not even thought to look for, but the pattern is in there somewhere in the data.
And in your experience, what are the key concepts that we need to, as heat treaters, that we need to focus that we don't know about? It's traceability, maintenance, equipment, downtime. I mean, do you go after specific troubleshoots that you've seen in the industry, or do you just taking the data and see where that specific company has a dip?
So mostly we just do, it's closed off, to the company. And a lot of that is just data security and integrity, that we don't necessarily share, information. So that, because every client has their own data, their own database, we don't share information. But we have a feedback mechanism that the more data we collect, the more you'll be able to tie it to an event, something that occurred, and you can kind of work backwards. So for example, and it depends if you have all the modules. Not everybody might need all the modules, but we have a maintenance module, and it's outside of the process of, receiving, process, shipping, invoicing. Like, that's the core. But outside that, we also have maintenance, and maintenance allows us to, it's essentially a ticketing system. So if there's an issue, anybody can hop on their device and request a maintenance item. And we also have preventative maintenance. So we have a whole preventative maintenance checklist that we do that every day, furnace checks, everything. Those are all data points that you have to have anyway, again, clipboard stuff, that someone submits something. So it can start to learn over time, that as we start to use the system. So right away, you might not get all the benefits, but after collecting data for a year or two, we start to very clearly see patterns of why something might happen, or especially on the predictive analytics side, something that could happen or could break. So the ideal situation isn't necessarily to help us analyze what happened. It's help us prevent it from happening.
Yes.
What are the conditions that occur that hurt the business somehow? and it's always some efficiency or, even safety. What are those signs? And of course, the more events that occur, the more we use it as a feedback loop. And that's where we start to fine tune, and train the models to say, these are what we're looking for. And it's across, we have data across all departments, but sometimes we might just use it in a single department. If you have something in the lab specifically, that and there's certain values that we saw, we can determine whether there's an issue with a piece of equipment because we see the pattern coming from there, or maybe calibration issues. All those things are very straightforward from an AI point of view, but just getting the data into that and knowing how to present it to the users, that's usually a challenge because this is the last thing a heat treater will be thinking about, right? And I don't think any heat treater will go out and say, I want AI. It's just something that we bring to the table by doing the things that they have to do anyway. They want, you want to be compliant and you want to save maybe a little bit of overhead on tasks that those bottlenecks tasks, like where it's taken forever, and we can automate so much. So right away they get the benefit. And then on top of that, we say, all right, well, because you did it right, and now everything's digitized, let's start creating this new opportunity. And for me, what I see moving forward is that as this starts to become more mainstream and we start to catch things and become more efficient, that's going to create the next level up of what you're going to need to be a successful heat treater. And at some point, I do feel it will be demanded, by their customers as well, that they meet that new standard and the new level. And that's, not even talking about the data collection that we have, the capabilities now, but just our ability to run more efficiently is just something that we're going to have to do, as an industry as a whole, as it's always, heat treat is always getting pinched, whether it's economically or, higher standards, but this is just an opportunity to help elevate, I feel, the entire industry.
So you're a tech company entering into the heat treat industry, which is pretty rare, right? Can you walk us through the business model? Because we know that most of the softwares as a service or the apps, they come with a subscription. We don't hear that much in the heat treat industry. What is the business model? You also talked about different modules: shipping and receiving, quality, traceability, compliance. You talk about trade tracking or alloy follow-up. Can you share a little bit what has the company business model, and if different sizes or shapes or even budgets for companies, how can you suit them all with different applications? You also mentioned that there may be companies that might not need a module, so it's kind of a tailor-made but already pre-engineered solution. Can you walk us through the business model?
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, we are a subscription licensed system that in the beginning, of a project, there would be a customization or a build phase. So there's usually that's set apart and kind of budgeted, and then we have our ongoing. The pricing model is unique. And again, it varies. So it'd be a very large, variations, but obviously the return on investment that we calculate together has to make sense. We have to there's either efficiency or an overhead reduction or something that we would clearly state in the beginning, say it's worth, going through the process, because it is a process. It's not going to say it's easy, but we try to do most of the heavy lifting, even a lot of the innovation thinking for them. We don't expect our customers to be software engineers or even software architects. And that's why we spend so much time in this industry, so that they don't have to, but we at least know what their world looks like. But the model is a licensed software. We do full support. We actually have 24/7 support. So if there's an issue in the middle of the night, there's somebody to jump on the phone with, like either text on the screen or call. We feel that's very important, because if you're running anything in production, whatever happens at 4 a.m. is just as important as it happens at 4 p.m. So that was a big piece for kind of structuring the business. So it comes with all that support. And the licensing, so we do by module in certain pieces that might be just kind of scale, doesn't really affect the operation. And on the other side, it's typically by equipment. So we kind of scale to the size of the heat treater based on number of furnaces. So that's how we kind of price our modules, and that's very different than a lot of other software packages that are usually by user. How many users do you have logged in? And the reason for this is because a lot of companies, especially your smaller, mid-sized, maybe heat treaters, they try to reduce their costs, and we understand that. And they might only have 5 logins or a certain set of logins that they try to reduce. And we have the exact opposite. We want them to have every single person in the building have a user account, even if they're just an assistant racker. It doesn't really matter. And the reason for that is that we want ultimate traceability. So anybody who touches any part of the process, that we want them to have a user in the system that if they scan in with a badge or log into a terminal, that anything that happens can be tracked down to that person. So that was very important to not create that limitation just because that's how our business, most businesses models are. So we want to create, hey, this is for every single user, even if they're a temp, even if they don't have an email address, they don't need it. There is a way to get in there. And that's where we, some of the additional modules, those not necessary modules, but very helpful ones. Like, for example, we also do employee time scheduling and check-in and scan-in, which is just an HR function, and there's a lot of software that can do that. But the interesting part, and if you piece all this together is, well, if we can manage that for them, and we can assign people to a particular, either station or piece of equipment. So we can be a little more detailed. But I'll give you one example. We have a notification system that if there's an issue with a piece of equipment, or something goes out of spec or anything, that we can send out notifications, text messages, to people at any time when that happens. If they're scanned into the system, we know who is working, who's there physically, and who's not there, right? So we can be very targeted with the way we do messaging within the building, or if it's across plants, So it seems very rudimentary, but because we can have users across the board, and because we didn't lock our licensing into users, that we want every single person, in there to have that capability. And then obviously there's dotted lines into payroll and and all of the other capabilities. Like, we have all that too, because that's not difficult to do. And we don't necessarily lock anyone on that side to just using our software. We do integrate with a lot of other software, whether it's Sage, QuickBooks, all these other accounting and HR platforms, because we're not going to take over everything. There is a limit, but the things that we touch are usually because we want continuity, because we'll get something out of it that we normally wouldn't get out of it. That's not sitting on an island. Doing employee data capture is not just something you do because that's how you want to run your business, but there's a benefit of having everyone have a badge, so we can collect the data, and it goes all the way back to traceability. Who was working, who was racking, who was doing trade tracking. All of that now gives me not an initial on a clipboard, but every little thing that was clicked on and typed, or a person who was just standing in front of a piece of equipment, now has a timestamp and a user ID. And so it's all kind of, all these different pieces, but there's a master plan behind all of it. And it all comes and stems from putting ourselves in a heat treater's shoes. What would you want to have? What would be the benefit? And so when we develop a module, it's usually revolves around that there has to be a reason for that to connect in. And so the last part I'll say, so from a module point of view, you don't need everything, right? You don't need to get the whole system. You might just want the maintenance, and you're not ready for anything. You just want to get to know the system. Well, that's a benefit by itself. So you can start with either a peripheral module or the core system, or just do logistics and shipping, receiving, which, obviously there's some software out there that don't go as deep as we do. That will help you get into the system, and then we can kind of do it over time. So it doesn't have to be this big elaborate migration, and then we're going to shut this down and turn that on. It's very unique. And then the last piece, sometimes it depends on the system, especially if it's like a homegrown system. You think it's like, oh, this was custom built by someone's, nephew 10 years ago, because, as a college thing. I don't know. There's opportunities for us where if you already have an existing system, we may be able to link into it and create a data migration live. So you can have your old system that you're running. We start building up the new modules and customizing them and actually having them run together. So you're using your old system and then you're actually able to log into Combustion OS and see all of your orders, lots, customers, all of them synchronize between the two. It doesn't happen every time, and some customers prefer just to start from scratch. But those are the sort of things that we look at to say, how can we go beyond to make this as painless as possible? So all of the pieces are kind of built into how we work, which again is a different business model than a lot of SaaS systems where their goal is to do the least amount of work, sell to as many people as they can. We're somewhere in the middle because we knew that to get into this industry, we didn't just want to offer something that is 80% great, but you can never hit 100% awesome.
Right.
If you want to get to 100% awesome, you have to go all in, and that's why our business model is the way it is.
Let me ask you a question not related to technically, but as an entrepreneur, as a tech entrepreneur, what's been the biggest challenge as a tech entrepreneur entering a traditional industry, such a traditional conservative industry? Well, what advice would you give to others looking to innovate in this kind of industries that are a little more conservative?
Sure. So I like people, so I'm a people person. I think I'm a little different than your typical tech geek. So I'm obviously very technical. My team's very technical, but I'm just a people person. So I love explaining things. I think education is the key for a lot of people trying to kind of break into something new, is to use education as a path to build trust and to help people not feel like a technology is just beyond them. So how you kind of break it down and be able to do things. That's why I do a lot of learning type of activities at conferences, and just kind of explain to people. And I love breaking things down, and creating an analogy. And so I think education is kind of the key. That if you're very technical, you can't just live in that space. You got to step out of it and put things into layman's terms for other people. But understand that they have, that industry. There's a lot of skills that you need to possess in order to be successful, and it's a very difficult industry too. So I think it's between the mutual respect of who you're working with, and then wanting to be helpful and be able to explain things and ask a lot of questions, and just always be curious. I'm always curious. I might be in the warehouse and I just see somebody do something, and I'm always asking myself, like, why are they doing it that way? Is it in? And you would walk in, a lot of people, younger, entrepreneurs, technical entrepreneurs, they'll come in and they're just like, oh, this is like, we could totally do a better way of doing this, and they would take those conservative people and just say, you're old and you're very archaic, you're a dinosaur, you don't really know what you're talking about, this is a much better way because it's all digital. And they fail and fall on their faces. And I know because I used to be one of them. Right. So, and then you kind of have this humbling experience, which is like, okay, they know what they're talking about. They know what they're doing. And you can't assume you're just going to replace everything with technology. You have to truly respect that there's certain things that have been done for so long for a reason. And once you absorb that and really appreciate it, then you will find the technical opportunities. And the other part of your question too, so for somebody who's trying to get into it, so I find heat treating, even though it is a niche and very kind of specific, and there's only so many, heat treaters compared to other industries. Or if you're looking at a service manufacturing, you could hop over horizontally to other type of service that are very similar in the sense that, just a different process that they do. But if you dive in a little deeper, there's just just so much abundance of opportunity to improve things, fix things. You can, there's a lot of things you can pioneer, and that to me is exciting. There's things that are light years ahead in other industries that are moving very quickly, and there's a lot of competition. This is a place where if you take the time and you really inquire and you're curious and you try to figure out if there's ways to improve things, I feel there's endless amount of opportunities to improve something. It's just a matter of balancing that eagerness and that hunger with making sure that whatever you're doing has a business rationale. And that is, for a lot of younger technical people getting into the space, they're so infatuated with the technology. It's like they always say, you have a new hammer, everything looks like a nail. It's like they always want to like improve something, and they always like, does this even need to be improved? And if it does, how is this going to affect the bottom line of the company? And I always go back to that, no matter what it is. It's always how is this going to create efficiency, improve product, or help the bottom line? And if it does that, and you can create a path there, then you got to calculate, well, what does that look like, and then how can I do that at scale to make it affordable? And that's there's a business side to that a lot of people who go to school learn whether you go to school or teach yourself, all the technology and coding and all this stuff. You have to, in order to be successful, you have to understand the business side, and you have to put yourself into that space. And usually those are two completely different things you're learning, and so you find a lot of people in spaces where they're kind of technical, they're very good in business, but they can't code. And honestly, in some industries, they shouldn't. Then you have people who can code or used to code, but they're just not good, not good with talking to people. You kind of have to do a little bit of both. So even if you're not doing day-to-day programming, if you had to roll up your sleeves and do it, you could. That's when you actually see the real opportunities, where coding is not a job. It is a tool set to say, we can write software, or we can use AI to solve that problem. But if you don't really understand how it works, you're never going to see the opportunity. And so that's what advice I'd give for a lot of younger, or not necessarily younger, people new. Age is not a factor anymore, but anyone who's kind of new into the space or are kind of eager to get into it. If you find that intersection, you will be successful. You will look at the world in complete abundance. There's just tremendous amount of abundance, and honestly, it doesn't matter what industry you're in. There's a lot of people who think that there's it's too late to get into something. There's always something that is neglected somewhere that you can improve upon, or find a better way or a cheaper way or something.
Sefi, thanks again for sharing your journey, your insights, and the amazing work you're doing with Combustion OS. For those who want to learn more about or connect with you or your team, where should they go?
Sure. You come to our website, combustionos.com, and from there you can get our contact info, reach out to us, and like I said, even if a lot of times we just have conversations, answer questions for people. We're don't really push on sales. It's more of just making sure that everybody
are you doing
what's available.
Trade shows or something?
Yeah, we do trade shows.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll be at ASM
all right,
coming up in October. So we'll be there. And we have a nice little booth that we're setting up to do a lot of the same things.
Right.
And I might be doing some speaking as well. So if you're in the area, the Detroit area, we'll be there.
Fantastic, Sefi. Thanks again to everyone listening. If you find value in today's conversation, don't forget to subscribe and share it with a friend or a colleague. Until next time, keep pushing on the boundaries of what's possible in Heat Treater, and see you again.